welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Hazel and I work in the marketing team here at Rullion. And I have the pleasure of being pilot today, driving your slides and facilitating our conversation. As I said, we are recording, so everything we say today will be available on demand, and we'll email everyone who's registered with the video link in the coming days. So if you do need to leave at any point in the call, you certainly won't miss out. So we've got two lovely speakers with us today. Our very own Dan.
Hey guys.
So Dan is trained to deploy director at Rullion and has spent years developing bespoke upskilling solutions that help organisations navigate their workforce challenges. And we have Natalie. Hi, Natalie.
Hello.
Hi. Natalie is founder and director at STEM Returners. Natalie and her team help STEM professionals return to work after a career break. And today we're diving into something that's been top of mind for many leaders: how to tackle critical STEM skills gaps and build future-proof teams through alternative hiring routes. That sounds like a tough one. I'm certainly no recruiter, so I'm lucky that you guys are here with your expertise to share all of your knowledge with us. So we've got a packed agenda. Say this just as my screen starts to do that spinning wheel of dread. There it is. There's our packed agenda. So both our speakers dedicate their careers to advocating for and championing underrepresented groups. Today, we're going to share their real stories from public sector and STEM organisations already doing things differently. So this is a conversational and practical session. It feels a bit formal, but it's definitely not going to be. So please don't hold back your questions. Just pop them in the chat and we'll make sure that they are included in the Q&A section right at the end. So that is enough from me. I think we should get started. And Dan, I'm going to pass straight over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, thanks Hazel, and thanks everyone for joining today. Great day in October. It feels like the longest month in a long time, especially for those getting paid in the last day of the month. But yeah, as Hazel says, my name's Dan Crerand, Director of Workforce Solutions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick off with a stat. It was exciting, but for me, this was genuinely one that stood out. I think 29.3% of UK employers now say that upskilling, reskill is their top HR priority ahead of hiring or well-being. So for me, I'll put that as an introduction, just a bit of a stat initially that I did actually take a bit of a double take to. I think initially it felt low for a bit of a headline stat. I think I was reading a white paper at the time and I kind of didn't really digest it at the same point. And when your mindset firmly believes there's a bit of a skills problem and you see a figure of 29%, you don't always think, oh, that's a great big headline. But I took it away and I looked at it in three different ways in terms of, first one being probably mindset shift, and this stat generally did surprise me. To be ahead of hiring shows the appetite for change is actually there now. It's just whether appetite actually equals action is where it's fallen short in the past. So employers are no longer seeing hiring as the only way to solve talent gaps, and that's progress. They're recognizing that developing existing or adjacent talent is now the priority. It also signals from an investment perspective, strategic and budget focus, moving towards L&D, workforce development. For me, it's always one of these things. It doesn't need to be one or the other. I see it as a chance for multiple business units actually to coexist, L&D, hiring, workforce planning. I'll believe that eventually it would kind of collapse into probably one function. Recruitment will no longer be a transaction, instead a bit of a coordinated build and deploy engine. And I think organizations that treat recruitment as separate, they're going to struggle to meet demand in the longer term. And that's great. Why not? It allows us to solve both hiring and capability changes in one, naturally supports areas like well-being indirectly, which supposedly have dropped in priority. So if we're saying things like 92% of skills shortages negatively impact productivity, or 72% people said that workloads for other staff as a result of skills shortages impacts well-being, again, you're in a position where you're kind of ticking two boxes with one. And then the final ring is really to do with cultural change. It reflects a growing acceptance that traditional recruitment can't keep pace of change. Employers need continuous learning. The World Economic Forum says half of employees need significant reskilling by 2027, not just because they're unskilled, but because technology is evolving faster than job design. And that includes you and I on the call today. So overall, it poses the question of whether we do, in fact, have a skills gap. And I suppose let me explain what I mean by that on the next slide. Cool, thank you. So yeah, let's start with something that we would say in terms of we hear in almost every sector, I suppose, and that's the skills gap. So the more we talk about a gap, the more it reinforces the idea of scarcity, as those skills or talents simply don't exist. Something we've kind of been accustomed to sort of accepting, to believing. Personally speaking, I think it just kind of creates this idea of this collective national or global epidemic, something that's out of our control, too big for one person or organization to even think about, almost like a generational thing, with everyone kind of looking around at sector competitors and thinking, I'm going to wait for someone else to aggressively take the lead, or are we clinging on to the hope that something tangible will come via education or the government? I'm not overly hopeful. What if instead that we look at the problem through a different lens, one of skills abundance, and not like where are the people, but how can we make the skills visible and relevant? So if we look at the reality, and thanks for moving that along for me then, Hazel. If we look at the reality, the truth is the talent isn't missing, it's probably hiding in plain sight. There are thousands of people out there with the capability, behaviours and desire to learn. They just haven't been shown how their skills transfer. Many school leavers and grads follow a path guided by parents, guardians, under-resourced careers teams. You don't really know your true skills. They continue to change over time, and you'll be forced into making a call very early. Without any real steer over the job market, I suppose, are you going to be in something you dislike? For me, I went to university to spend lonely days on a construction site as a quantity surveyor. That's something that probably wasn't suited to my skills set as I grew older. Or are we walking into a minefield where you are qualified, but you're in a bit of a needle in a haystack trying to find work? So I've seen it before. A journalist or an arts grad maybe doesn't realize their creative skills may be a match for a digital training course, let's say UX design, or a technician from the forces may have the perfect mindset needed for energy or transport, for example. Others are isolated in legacy roles, jobs where they are thriving or concerned about the future. A project manager, for example, in retail, we've seen it before in our organization, they can thrive in infrastructure delivery, but how would they even begin to know that? And that'll take time. We either need to find ways of working with transferable talent pools and helping them to understand the art of the possible for their careers, or my kind of blue sky thinking is that we see employers actually being more prescriptive on job descriptions as we get a few more years down the line, and actually start calling out to those in different sectors. Actually, yet they know that we can have those conversations with them right now and they will consider it. But again, how does that person in a different sector know that those sectors would consider their background? So it's not that people don't exist. It's just that they don't really fit neatly into the boxes that we've kind of built. Boxes sort of built on legacy, what we've always done based on people qualifying and decades gone by. And it's a very different world to 2025.
Next myth,
please. Next myth, please. And the next myth is really to do with only ready-made hires count. So when we talk about skills gap, and I promise it doesn't keep me up at night, it's driven by the desire to get someone experience and tomorrow. That's how recruitment works. The way of recruitment, in many cases, our clients know there's a skills challenge, but until their budget prevents them from chasing experience, they've historically found it easier to kick the can down the road for a few more months, or there's a fire to put out now, let's discuss this next year. So that's how the hiring market has been for decades. Job descriptions have been driven by what hiring managers want. And why not? That they had a position where they could be picky. Why wouldn't they ask for these 12 essential criteria and these 8 desirable qualities? And recruiters like ourselves would typically deliver on that. But that want now has become a need, and that's where the opportunity must lie. So there needs to be more urgency. That's probably the main piece for me to take away, is to go, how do we stop our teams and our businesses from thinking there will be a huge productivity loss in going down this route? Maybe that there's a massive hand-holding requirement, or many of these workers are going to take a long time to integrate. That's not the case. They actually integrate very quickly. So I think the message for me was, when did we decide that on-the-job learning becomes a weakness rather than an investment? Because for many fields, that was actually quite commonplace in years gone by. And I think the idea that only ready-made hires can deliver quick value quickly overlooks the potential in candidates who can actually be trained or upskilled. And for me, I think this is when I came into Rullion, about setting up my product, about training to deploy. It was very much about, these are all great reasons to come into Rullion and set this product up. We have a massive skills need. But also, I think the missed opportunity is going to be around diversity, especially in the likes of STEM, critical infrastructure. It's about looking for this ready now mindset filters people out from different industries, background, life stages, people who could succeed actually with a little bit of training. And I think every time we say someone maybe isn't industry ready, we're forgetting that every industry changes, especially now, and learning is always going to be part of that job. Mind moving on to the next reality for me, please? Thanks, Hazel. Yes, so I think this is a big one for me personally. I think let's switch it and look at the potential reality again. The reality is skills are abundant, they're not scarce. So many candidates have transferable skills that can be applied to new roles, even if they haven't done that exact job before. So the pandemic on the whole was, other than the bucket loads of wine deliveries at my door, it was awful for many people. Let's not miss that. But one positive is that since then, we've seen a real massive increase in quality in terms of things like training providers and pathways, which when matched with the right person, gives us a really good starting place for change. So for me, upskilling actually nowadays is not the hard bit, it's prioritizing it. It's actually the hard bit. Until businesses start treating development like any other critical investment, that mismatch is just going to remain. And I think investing in development will create a pipeline of loyal, capable employees. I think closing that gap faster, waiting for the perfect hire, it's going to be obviously much more profitable. I think if we say, and anyone who knows me knows I talk about this quite a lot, but if 85% of jobs in 2030s will be new roles that do not even exist yet as of today, surely it's now about finding people that have that actual learning agility now. Because if this materializes by 2030, it starts to push to a position which would ultimately suggest that CVs would be less critical, because if the jobs are new, then you're not going to get that CV that has 5-10 years experience anymore. They'll sort of cease to exist. And I think I sort of take it up one more notch on top of that as well and go, if we are in a position where 85% of people are in new jobs that do not exist yet, there's going to be a lot of people still transitioning and adjusting. And I think if it's me sitting here in 2025, I'm thinking if these stat predictions come to fruition, then when it does come to 2028, 29, 30, your workforce is actually already primed, because you've upskilled someone agile and open-minded today in 2025. And that's surely the type of person that you'd be perfect to have in your organization when it comes to 2028 to 2030, where you need a hand raiser or somebody that would be a good match to be reskilled again in a few more years' time. So for me, yeah, there's no shortage of capable people. It's more that we have a shortage of flexible pathways and open-minded hiring. Thank you, Hazel. So we talk about a skills gap, and it's often a system gap, really. One that excludes people who are ready and capable simply because they just don't fit a linear career model that we built hiring around. And something's not broken, why fix it? It has worked for many years, and I fully understand that, but that's the position we're in now. So many organizations have historically assumed that people returning to work, switching careers, are risky hires, so people that might slow down productivity, require a little bit of additional management. And I think that belief reinforces the idea of narrow, ready-made talent pools. So it also underestimates the adaptability and prior experience these candidates can actually bring. And we did speak about earlier on in terms of the basic aspects of things like CVs and JDs, job descriptions. Many job specs assume, we've seen it going through careers, people going, traveling, etc., having to compensate for that when it comes to the CV. But traditional career paths, yet modern career paths, they're not linear anymore. They're not always uninterrupted. Roles are often written for that ideal candidate, as I mentioned before, who's already in the industry. Whereas returners, whether it's caregiving, parental relocation, redundancy, or switchers from other industries, they have the skills, but hiring processes have notoriously penalized career breakers or non-traditional experience, which is disappointing, but we are moving into a better territory. And that is what creates this artificial gap as such in talent supply. And then back to the reality again, I think the reality is the opposite. and these groups are a hidden reservoir of talent. Returners bring maturity and perspective, and untapped groups bring diversity and adaptability. Switchers bring fresh thinking, they bring adaptability, cross-sector insights that can spark innovation. And people hear the word innovation and everyone's brain jumps to self-driving cars and augmented reality and 3D printing or self-healing systems on trains, which you can tell I've been working in the train sector, the rail sector for a little bit longer recently. But innovation is about people who think differently, diversification, challenge assumptions. They bring fresh perspectives to old problems. I used to have a hiring manager in the financial services sector who would bring in train to deploy upskilling talents at probably the graduate end of the spectrum, simply because he knew that they came in with a different way of looking at things and challenged what was quite a long-standing inherent large retention team that had worked in a certain way for the last 10 years. And put those two side by side and you naturally saw a lot of benefits for both parties. So I think where companies do invest in non-traditional hiring methods, such as returnships, boot camps, train to deploy, the results actually prove that we can close the gap really quickly. And I think that's one of the main aspects to overcome, is that we fully appreciate the importance of a skill or someone's experience or education, plus sector restrictions around certain requirements. And I'm not trying to undermine that, but I think a major kind of misconception is that upskilling or training feels costly, timely. Most of the training isn't always lengthy training periods in reality. There are many short targeted learning pathways that can bridge any technical gaps actually quite rapidly. And if we start thinking about industries like and roles within engineering, for example, 20 to 25% of the workforce is going to retire by 2030. So if we aren't looking into kind of like non-traditional talent sources now, I'm just sort of asking, like, what is the plan? Because recruiters have never had more tools, more AI tech, more insights, more events, more networks. L&D teams have got great thought leaders, advanced training solutions, skills testing, micro learning, AI platforms again, but it's still not working. So neither of those can kind of do it alone is the message. And we certainly cannot hire our way out of a skills issue. That's what we've tried to do before. So I think looking back on all that, I think that's my kind of myth versus the reality on things. I think we've looked at both sides of the coin. I hope that's given you a bit of food for thought. For me, it's less about a shortage of skills, as I've mentioned, and more about how we see and kind of value them. We keep talking about a skills gap, but in the same way we talk about a crisis. The truth is, for me, the talent is kind of it's everywhere. It's out there. But whilst we continue to filter out anyone who doesn't look like yesterday's hire, we're not going to progress the way we kind of need to. Thank you, Hazel. So I hope that's giving you a bit of different perspective on where we are when it comes to skills, and it brings us neatly onto STEM. Obviously, the caveat being that my work is not solely in the STEM field. The principle of today's chat is about all sectors, really. Any sector that's struggling for demand, this can kind of be applied to. So I think the majority of us realize that with STEM, demand is growing fast. It's well publicized. I think in certain areas, supply really is struggling to keep up. If we take a closer look at that, what that actually means for organization and where opportunity and risk lies, and I won't go into all of the above headlines, but I'm going to kind of pick out a couple that kind of stood out to me. So Dan, the ex-early head of early careers person, looks at the CBI insights on the top right there and thinks if that's what's expected in the UK, we need to spend an additional £13 billion a year on adult education alone to keep up with demand solely. That figure actually represents a 25% increase in current spending levels. So as you can imagine, that's going to have a massive impact. And for us, obviously, that's being positioned as a cost. That's not actually just a cost, though. It can be an investment and it can be an opportunity to grow the workforce. So actually start future-proofing some of these industries and then start looking to unlock this talent. So that would be the first one. And then the second one is probably the top left. And I'm not being greyest here, but we'll go with the grey one again. 173 million. Sorry, that would be even worse if it was 173 million. 173,000 unfilled STEM roles isn't just a number. Still large. It's real projects that are delayed. It's innovations that are stalled. It's teams that are stretched too thin. Every empty chair risks burnout for existing staff, slower product development, missed opportunities for growth. And that's kind of the wake-up call. I think if we don't invest in training, upskilling, the sector and the economy for all of us will feel it. For me, STEM and the jobs that are powered by it are actually so interesting. I think my background prior to Rullion was very much financial services. I came into the world of STEM, critical infrastructure, and you have such incredible intelligence in this field, mind-blowing ideas, tech advancement, imagination. Some of the projects being delivered and things that are being built are crazy, but that's all very well and good. For me, that's fine, but we actually need to build the people who are actually going to deliver it, because it's all words until we have the people that can actually press the buttons. Okay, before I turn it into a bit of a TED Talk in STEM, because I am certainly not the expert on this call, I'm going to bring in someone who actually knows a lot more than myself. I stumbled upon STEM returners on LinkedIn. I think it must have been about 18 months ago, and I was really impressed by both Natalie and their business's kind of mission to help talent people return to the STEM career after a break. And I thought, like, why not reach out and collaborate? And then fast forward 17 and a half months, and we are here today. So over to you, Natalie. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Didn't take us too long, Dan, but no, I really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate, and that's very much what we want to do at STEM Returners, because we absolutely can't do this on our own. And what I found really interesting is, you know, at the start of this talk is you're completely right. We talk about a skills gap all of the time. From a returner's perspective, we have 23,000 people with fantastic skills and experience struggling to return. So there's a big disconnect there with, you know, with like you said, with the perceived skills gap and the abundance of talent. So a little bit about us. I started STEM Returners in 2017, actually came out of industry. So I was the chair of an organisation called UK Nest, oversee that UK naval defence sector, so BA and Babcock. And at that time, I was looking at ways to possibly impact the skills gap, because we had areas within quite niche technical STEM roles within naval that we were struggling to fill, but also to do something positive in diversity, because within that naval sector, we were faring even worse in other sectors. We were looking at sub 5% women, sub 3% ethnic minority background candidates. And I knew, because I went to a Women's Engineering Society conference the year before, that there was an abundance of people who were struggling to return through standard channels. And I think they cited something like 50,000 people who had left and struggled to return. So it was initially a pilot. We trialled it with BA Systems and Babcock. It was successful. They ran it again. And then STEM Returners organically became a company, passion project for me. And yeah, since then, we've just returned our 626th engineer, which is great. However, as I said, I've got 23,000 looking, so there's a long way to go. The reality is there are thousands of highly skilled STEM professionals locked out of these standard recruitment processes. So providing a returners programme is about giving these much needed skills that equitable route back. And that equity piece is really important, because you might say, oh, well, if we had a returner apply, then of course we'd consider them. And I'm sure you would. But in reality, when a returner is compared to somebody without a career break, or somebody with a non-linear CV is compared to somebody who's coming out of a direct competitor, they simply get deselected at the first stage. And we see it time and time again. Companies run returner programs. They run them for 4 key reasons. They're struggling to recruit through standard channels. You know, like Dan was saying, we are in a skills gap market, particularly in STEM. Those businesses also aren't getting diversity through standard applications. Also, companies often use it, and this is my favourite bit, to really impact organisations in running a programme, to change the hearts and minds of the hiring manager community about who the best fit for the role is. You know, we all have bias, and it's about recognising that bias, and that actually the best person for the role might not have necessarily gone to the same university as you and have the same background as you. And also companies use it for social value reasons as well, because it's obviously a good thing to do. Thank you. I didn't even need to say next slide. I want to mention who is a returner, because companies and hiring managers often have in their mind who a returner is, and it's usually a returning mum, and returning mums are part of it. But the reality is a returner can be anyone. None of us are immune to the curveballs of life that mean you might need to step away from your career. And actually, some people choose to. You know, a career break is a normal part of many of our working lives. But the returners we see, they could be neurodivergent graduates who struggle in assessment centres and are now working outside of industry, right through to a senior director who's taken a mental health career break. So of course it will include those returning from maternity and caring responsibilities, but also redundancy. And the impact that COVID had on redundancy, particularly in older workers, was huge. Returners are much more diverse in the industry that they have left. The number one reason for taking a career break is care responsibilities, but that's broadly split, not just maternity, but with elder care as well. And we know with both maternity and elder care, it's still largely women taking those breaks. So that means that naturally engineering returners are 45% female versus depending on what report you read, anywhere between 10 and 14% in industry. Our research also shows a disproportionate impact on engineers from ethnic minorities. So 39% of our returners are from ethnic minority groups compared to 9% in industry. It also suggests there are additional barriers at entry level to graduates from ethnic minority backgrounds. And there's I was on a recent webinar with the AFBE, who said that despite 27% of all UK domiciled engineering students being from ethnic minority backgrounds, only 9% actually make it into industry, so less than half. So aside from filling skills gap roles, returners programs can be a really practical way to also positively impact diversity and inclusion. And that is natural, the background of people who take breaks. It was never designed to be an ED&I program. It's naturally evolved into one. It was always designed as a mechanism to fill the skills gap. So although we had anecdotal evidence that returners struggle to return, engineers, who are the majority of people that I'm trying to sell programs to, love a stat. So to really make sure we understand the barriers from the returner's perspective, 5 years ago, we started gathering evidence, and we create a now annual report called the STEM Returners Index. We use this to understand the barriers that returners are facing in returning and to educate individual employers in how they can remove those. We also try to use it to ensure that industry as a whole is aware of these barriers and how removing them is an important step in creating an inclusive and accessible sector, which is obviously in all of our benefits. Last year, we had over 1,000 returners respond to the survey, and that gave us a really good insight into the individual barriers that returners face. It's really hard to get people to fill in a survey, so 1,000 was a good number. But what having that amount of people allows us to do is recognise some really common themes. We have just finished collating responses for 2025, and we will publish those results probably next month, so keep an eye out for those. But as you can see, the highest reason for taking a career break over the last 2 years has been childcare responsibilities. And when that is added to other care responsibilities, it's by far the biggest reason for anyone to step away from their career. But as I said, there are many reasons that anyone might need to take a career break. Most of those who step away don't step away for very long, or they certainly don't anticipate that they will, and they don't realise that the break will have such a detrimental impact when they look to return to their career. On here, those who have transferred citing transferring sector, often from the forces. So we have a big community of ex-serving personnel who've struggled to transfer their skills to a second career. And interestingly, we've just launched a programme last week with the Royal Navy, which is about trying to bring some of those people back to the forces as well. But there's a big ex-forces community. And also ex-forces partners, because of course people move around a lot, and they found a lot of spouses that have had a non-linear career for relocation reasons. Next slide, please. So one of the key barriers returners face is this belief that a career break leads to a deterioration of skills. And that is even worse depending on what sector you're working in. So engineering hasn't changed that much, to be honest, in the last 5 years. But something like tech, there's a real bias around if somebody's been out of tech. The industry moves so quickly, the impact of things like AI. But that break means that in comparison to a non-career break candidate, the returner is usually filtered out at the very early stages of an application. Most returners haven't been out very long. Nearly 60% of returners have had a career break of 2 years or less. However, we do know that if a returner doesn't return by that 2-year point, they are much more likely to be on an unplanned career break for much longer, and it makes their return much harder. Although our longest returner was 21 years, so it's never too late. Next slide, please. So when initially looking to return, returners apply for lots of roles, and our research tells us that they rarely get feedback. It's not just returners. I think, there's a genuine issue with feedback in general for roles, particularly within STEM. But these returners quite quickly realise that the industry is not interested in their skills, and they stop applying and usually join other sectors. And they're joining other sectors usually below their capability. By the time they join a returners programme, their confidence has been hugely impacted, and this becomes a barrier on its own. So most of our returners have applied for 70, 100 vacancies and been unsuccessful, and that has a massive impact. 65% of returners are finding the process of returning to work difficult or very difficult. That actually increased from 2023, where it was 51%. Which is probably reflective of the lack of opportunities generally from a recruitment perspective last year. We've all seen the stats of, less vacancies available basically every quarter. It seems to be dwindling at the moment. And of course, in a constricting market, returners are going to be even more impacted than anybody else. The lack of feedback we discussed in the previous slide is also having a huge effect on returners' confidence. And as I said, that becomes a barrier of its own. It means they stop trying to return at all and risk the sector losing their skills completely. We have to remind people, particularly hiring managers, that this is about saying yes to people that they might normally say no to through those outdated recruitment channels. These are people that are routinely being unsuccessful. And here's the good stuff. So I want to show this slide to demonstrate the impact that running a returners programme can have. It makes a tangible difference to the returners. It's life-changing for those returners. Those returners who have had so many no's suddenly, have an opportunity to restart their career. That's huge. But also the businesses, and with increasing numbers, the industry as a whole. It's changing the way the industry looks. And the industry thinks about transferable skills and skills gaps and career breaks as well. I mentioned that STEM returners started as part of an industry-wide working group, and Defence have really embraced the concept. So we started in Defence, and of the 620 people we've returned, over 300 of these have been to UK Defence. The programme was also recognised last year of the Women in Defence Equity of Opportunity Award. So the reason I'm talking about this is Defence is a really traditional sector, and I'm sure some of you have worked with defence organisations, and I always say if it can work with Defence, it can work anywhere. And we had a really interesting conversation when we launched the Navy programme. The Royal Navy used to kind of have the mindset and the concept of you're lucky to apply for the Navy, you're lucky we're considering you for the Navy. Their stance is now, we're lucky you're considering the Navy, and we're lucky you've applied to the Navy, and thank you for that. So the culture is really changing, but because obviously we are in a skills gap market. But embracing returners is a practical way to start changing your company's diversity. So 46% of all of our returners are female, compared to industry average of 14%. 34% from ethnic minority backgrounds, compared to 9%. I said it earlier. 96% of all returners have returned to their careers permanently because they had that equitable route back. So a returners programme starts as a 12-week placement. There's no obligation for the returner or the hiring company to retain that person, but 96% of all people return permanently. It's because they're really good people. They just needed that opportunity to have that equitable route back in the first place. Returners are highly qualified, experienced. They're mid-career professionals. Loads of great stuff is going on at early career. This is a way to impact what mid-career looks like. They have loads of value to bring back to industry, and of course, we all benefit as they do from their return. And it wouldn't be a demonstration of the success of returners if I didn't include a little case study. So this is a recent case study from EDF. EDF have just launched Programme 2. On Programme 1, they brought in 13 returners, and they've just launched Programme 2, largely concentrated within nuclear build part of EDF. It's well documented the nuclear industry needs a high number of STEM skills over the coming years. The industry have recognised that they need to be creative in attracting and developing nuclear skills. I'm sure you've all seen the stuff they've done around destination nuclear and transferring careers, which is really good. And returners are playing a big part of that. Last year, as I said, we did some work with the Government Equalities Hub. They estimated that there are 75,000 people who have left STEM and not returned. So there is a huge pool of experienced, as I said, usually mid-career individuals who have loads of value to bring. And here is one of those, Maria. Maria returned to EDF Nuclear last year. She applied for, she believes, over 70 positions unsuccessfully, only because she had a break. She had fantastic prior skills and experience. She'd had about 5 years off to raise children. When she found out about the returners programme with EDF, and she's now back doing what she loves, and being a returner is a distant memory for her. She's just, back to her career. And for all of our returners, the opportunity to return has been genuinely life-changing. All of those 626 people have struggled so much, and it's genuinely given them their career, their life, and in many instances, has been really impactful. Like one of our returners had returned from domestic abuse, and she was living in a women's refuge, and we actually placed her at Cavendish Nuclear, and she'd had an unplanned 5-year career break. Fantastic skills and experience, nuclear physicist. I mean, they certainly don't grow on trees. She'd applied for so many roles, been unsuccessful. She joined Cavendish. This was about 4 years ago. And she's got promoted a couple of times, and she phoned us 6 months ago to say, I had to tell you, I've just bought a flat, first time on my own, I've bought a flat. And that's because you and Cavendish believed in me 4 years ago. It really makes a difference to the individuals. And it's not just the returners who benefit. The employers have recruited talented and skilled individuals for roles they were struggling to fill. Many of these returners are going into roles that companies have had open for 6 months, 12 months. They cannot find the skilled people out there. And all they've done is taken a perceived, not real, risk on somebody with a break, and the returners speak for themselves. The fact that 96% of them are retained at the end, shows that they're great people. Sorry, I'm over talking on slides. So Dan, is this a joint slide that we're doing, or?
This one is very much myself. The next one we're a joint one, but I just wanted to say on that previous slide, like really, really great to see. I think both from the new homeowner and from Maria. I think I absolutely love to see stories like that. That's really great, and it just shows you the talent that's out there. And I think in what you said around the mid versus early careers, we invest so much into early careers. I'm obviously an advocate of early careers, but that mid-career investment is nowhere near the same level. And that's where I think we need to split it down the middle a little bit. So I'll quickly just move on to the next sector, just to really give a bit of a public sector lens, looking at the challenge opportunities that exist within that for anyone that is kind of from public sector or kind of closely aligned to public sector. Because it's such a large market, such a large one to influence, it's so incredibly important to be able to offer them support, as it's realistically, if we can support the public sector with more kind of strategies like this, it's going to impact us all down the line. So completely understand with public sector, very much they have their challenges, rigid structures, bureaucracy around kind of strict job specs, procurement rules, risk-averse processes. They've got regulatory and union constraints. We've got skills gaps and delays, obviously are being created like the rest of us. And obviously there is a really high cost of inefficiency to them, currently sitting with many unfilled roles, underutilized talent, increasing operational risk and costs. But that's really the challenges. I think was more kind of on today's call to really look at the opportunities for me for the public sector. I think, and again, similar to what we said earlier on, this will apply to non-public sector too in many ways. But with the public sector, they almost have a chance to lead by example, shifting from dependency on short-term high-cost agency labour to investing in sustainable talent pipelines. That's what I'm kind of all about, it being a workforce strategy that will pay dividends over time. Natalie's done a really good job of kind of talking about earlier from her perspective, but it's also about widening access and social mobility. I think public sector bodies have a social purpose mandate to reflect the communities that they serve. This type of thing, STEM returners, what we're doing with Train Deploy, that can reflect that. It's an easy way to deliver an inclusion, because I love the commitments we're seeing around the kind of clean energy, 400,000 jobs. We saw Skills England, but it's gone a little bit quiet We've got the apprenticeship levy, but there's a 12% drop in uptake over the last 5 years. Something clearly isn't working, and that's why we need to look at the non-traditional options. Cost efficiency, completely understand that. Long-term value of public finances under scrutiny. Every spend must demonstrate value for money, but train to deploy and returner programs, they actually reduce agency spend and churn. They increase retention. They support productivity. So once trained, you're talking about individuals that are more likely to stay. Natalie's really back end of the 90% figure there. It sort of tells you that itself. Once you invest in these people, the kind of proof's in the pudding. So yeah, for me, well, from public perspective, I think there are budget or policy constraints, but this is exactly why it matters. I think the public sector cannot afford not to innovate. Train to deploy isn't about adding cost. That's not what this is. That is a myth in itself. It's about relocating and reallocating it more intelligently, investing in people who can kind of grow within their organization. So next slide, please, Hazel. Okay, so now we're approaching the end. I really wanted to just get to a point where we end on this kind of final slide. I will bring Natalie back into the equation. I think this is because I'm fully aware everyone has a multitude of webinars and events and networks, and there's thought leaders and white papers and podcasts, and probably you've seen me doing all of those in the last 12 months. But lots of opinions. I think that's the real thing, and they're largely all coming from the right place, which is great. But there's still not enough to drive enough change and get us away from that gap term. We need to find a better way to make things easier, to visualize. I was asking a question at an event last week around STEM and engineering, which was, look, there are these worrying shortages. And what periods do you see that we need to fix this by? And what does good look? And I just simply said the word betterment. That's how I see it. It is a long journey. I don't think it's about setting huge targets on certain things because it's got us nowhere so far. It's actually about finding ways to break these little things, whether it's outcomes off the back of webinars or it's company strategies, about how we break them into small, achievable practicalities and start moving things in the right direction. So on the topic of practicalities, I will bring Natalie back into the equation on this one. So from all you can see on the screen in terms of people taking something away, from a practical perspective, Natalie, is there any one or two that sort of jumps out of you kind of more so than the others?
I think they're all quite important, so I'll briefly touch on all of them because I do like to talk about the barriers, but these are things that you can easily remove to make opportunities more accessible to returners. So first, forget job specs for all people out rather than in. Unconfident returners will not apply to lengthy job specs. They're really good at ruling themselves out already. Create inclusive adverts, the least amount of information on them as possible. I really hate things like desirable on a job spec, because if you don't have it, you're just saying you're not desirable to my organisation. So really think about the way that you're positioning that. I do think about, I think it's important to provide a returner's opportunity, because again, it's about equity. If returners shouldn't be included in those normal recruitment channels, because, and I've seen it, the same thing that always happens, returners get filtered out in comparison to somebody without a break or with that kind of linear career history. If you are running a returners program, always make sure there's a permanent position available at the end of the program. For me, it's never been about providing work experience. It's a mechanism to return people permanently. It also doesn't allow hiring managers to think differently, as it feels too much like recruitment, and you really don't want to be thinking about any of these programs in that kind of standard recruitment mindset. Always choose the right hiring managers, make sure they are brought in. Often a program for us is put in place by ED&I and HR teams. The hiring managers are the people reviewing CVs. They're providing the day-to-day support to the returner. They have to get it. And the perception when they start on this journey is, this is going to be more work for me and this is going to take me away from my day job. And it's only when you place that returner and they're retained that individual hiring manager's heart and mind is changed about the value that different people can bring. Feedback is key throughout the whole process. And again, this relates back to confidence. Returners need to know that they're doing a good job, have the opportunity to ask questions, improve and develop. So, I think that's really the only difference from a hiring manager's perspective, is to provide more feedback. Otherwise, I think the onboarding process looks completely the same. Always suggest a light touch in interviews, again, primarily because of confidence. I mean, to be honest, I question why anyone needs a 3-stage interview process. I'd question why an interview might include a presentation unless it's part of the role. All of that is not just off-putting to returners. It impacts neurodivergent people and often women. Anyone who might be feeling unconfident, can find that really structured interview process really daunting, and you don't get the best out of somebody. And lastly, ensure you've got your support in place. So with our returners, we have a coach who works with our returners right from application stage and throughout their program. We also pair every returner with an engineering mentor, which makes a huge impact to their confidence. But you can do that internally, internal mentors and buddies. And also, we're seeing a lot of returners now linked up with employee resource groups. There's been a real increase in ERGs, which has provided lots of support and benefit to returners too.
Well, you can't say more than that. I think, I'll just echo what Natalie said. I think finding the right hiring managers is really important on this. I've tried it before where the hiring managers just simply doesn't get it. It's the ones that are invested into this are perfect as a match. I think I'll never get surprised by the fact you get a message from them saying how good that person was, that once they've trained them, upskilled them, almost like they are so surprised. And we're just like, we did sort of tell you this. It's not like, I don't know what you're expecting. For me, it's just very simple. I think just try and understand from a hiring manager, what pressures are you under? Are you missing projects due to talent shortages, getting called out for poor diversification, losing projects on risk or quality? Almost talking to them about the business impact of having a role unfilled for 1 month. Are you aware you're probably losing 20 to 50,000 pounds in lost productivity for having delivery slippage? I think kind of Natalie talked about desirables as well. It's about looking at which skills are critical, which ones are nice to have, which ones are non-negotiables in the roles. That's the real big conversations where you sit down with a hiring manager, you look at a job description, you go, how much of this can we strip back? That's the main thing. And that's what I did with one of my clients in rail. We now are in a position where we sit back, we managed to look back, strip some stuff off the job description, and we got to a point that actually not only did we look at the rail sector, but we were looking at mechanics and aviation and people in construction, people that had a transferable skills that were matched with training in rail with a little bit of health and safety. We were deploying them within 4 to 6 weeks. So really, really big to get those consultative conversations with your clients. And that's really just some steer points. I will pass it back to Hazel. I think the main comment I would just say to end is just probably on the behalf of Natalie and myself. Obviously, if any of that does resonate and you need to know how to kind of have those conversations, keep exploring them, please feel free to kind of reach out to either of us. Thank you, Hazel.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Packed full of information. I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't trying to prioritize our Q&A section. So I'm going to start off with the questions that people have submitted in when they registered. So I've had a couple through. I think this is a good one to start off with because it will talk to the both of you. What's the biggest myth about the skills gap that you'd like to bust today?
So I'll jump in, since it sounds like I've got a passionate hatred for the word skills gap or phrase. So people are going to think I've got this real chip on my shoulder. I'm going to continue that. So for me, it's probably in the term itself. And if we had Susie Dent here and we were given the definition of skills gap, and apologies if you've never watched Countdown, you probably won't understand that, but it would be something like a skills gap is the difference between the skills employers need for a job and the skills that employees or job candidates actually have. So on face value, am I going to be the one to say that's incorrect? Factually, the term and description probably does stand up kind of versus reality. I think, sure, when we consider simply having increasing volumes of roles where applications are drying up, yes, it's got to be correct. But I think before we commit to the use of gap, you got to look at the job specs, as we've just discussed. Are they negotiable, prescriptive, outdated views of talent pools? Often are we asking for unrealistic skills that don't exist in a candidate, i.e. do they have 10 years of experience needed alongside the latest tech and machinery skills, or have we considered those with transferable skills? I think for me, maybe the skills gap isn't just that people don't have skills, it's the skills that employers are asking for are maybe too narrowly defined or unrealistic. And I think when we do define talent too narrowly, we create the shortage that we are worried about. We often hear we do not have the budget for that far too often, but the reality is, if you think training's expensive, I suppose like try not training is the main piece.
Yeah,
I mean, do you have anything? Go on.
I have nothing to add to that, really. I mean, from my perspective, companies say, nuclear is a great example. 30,000 skills needed by 2030, where are they going to come from? Well, I can say I've got 23,000 returners who would love to, rejoin nuclear, and it is about recognizing those transferable skills. And it's not even particularly transferring. If we're transferring skills from a returner's perspective, we are placing somebody, a mechanical design engineer, into a maritime shipbuilding organization from auto, aero, rail. They're a mechanical design engineer. So I think there's a real myth around the amount of training and development and time that a hiring manager is going to need to invest, because that transfer piece is genuinely really easy to do, but very difficult to do through kind of standard hiring.
Great stuff. Dan, I've heard you talk about the skills gap, and I've also heard you say oven-ready candidates more than once. I'm still not sure I know what that means, but I've got a question here. What would happen if we stopped competing for oven-ready candidates and started building talent?
Yeah, I know that oven-ready term does kind of grind a few gears for a few people. It definitely has different opinions across the board. What would happen if we just stop fishing in the same pond? We start cultivating our own. We building talent, like, sort of broadens our access. It's going to strengthen loyalty. Like, if you think about being seen as a company we had a client who had a skill that was needed by certain people in a certain role, and without it, they would arguably redundancy risk, and they were happy to have conversations with us about taking some people out of the workplace and returning them. Was a really great message for that business and for those employees to be kind of topped up from a future skills perspective. I think doing that, it reduces the cost per hire and long-term commercial losses. I think as a byproduct, you're getting teams with a deeper understanding of your systems and your culture. I suppose crucially, the main element for me to consider is that it's probably actually within your question, Hazel. What I mean is if you're asking a question, which is, if we stopped, I suppose, in fact, the likely market's going to take that out of our hands in a few months. We kind of will have to stop. We will not have oven-ready talent because those talents are no longer going to be there. And I think that's just part of the market. I think that's all we've ever known. It's just not working. Like, if you look at 98% of engineering employers say they face skill shortages. And I saw a stat from the summer saying there was a 36% drop month on month in terms of applications to engineering roles. So fundamentally, it's more going back to the question itself, is that we will get into that point where we're going to have to.
Okay, I'm reading some more, guys. Natty, I think this one's going to resonate with you. It's about one of your favorite topics, AI. What impact is AI going to have on selection, and could it disadvantage certain groups?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the answer yet, really. It's still pretty new in being used. I have massive concerns over AI because, of course, AI has been built, it's historical, it's built on history, and it's built on the way that we've recruited in the past. And that's what worries me, because actually, we're talking about recruitment bias, we're talking about oven-ready candidates, we're talking about recruiting in our own image, and AI is going to play that back to us, and that's what worries me. I think it's got a fantastic opportunity to actually really help us in identifying transferable skills and identifying opportunities, skills-based hiring, for example. But we don't seem to be using it in that capacity. We seem to be using it as a tool, again, to filter people out. And that's where so many people get disadvantaged, when we use it as a reason to say no to people rather than a reason to say yes. So I'd say big opportunity, but it's currently built on historical data, and unfortunately that is pretty biased and disadvantaging a lot of people. So yeah, it's a worry. Would I use it right now? Absolutely not. Would I suggest people use it? I think if you are using it, then you have to have the human element in there. You have to be checking that AI. There's been lots of really great examples of where AI isn't yet delivering what the question that you're asking it. So I think there has to be a huge human element checking, because at the end of the day, recruitment is about people. And when we take people out the process, for me, that's when we've got enough bias in all of us. So adding AI bias into that is only going to be disadvantaging.
Dan, is there an alternative view there? I know that you've got your like psycho assessment tools that you're using when you're trying to identify people based on behaviours, which are underpinned by AI. Is there an alternative view that you wanted to share, or you're in agreement with Natalie?
I would say it's an alternative view. I think there's very much to be confirmed for a lot of people. I think we haven't really been in a position to see the true impact on it. I think I'm in a position, especially from an early careers and probably into the world of train to deploy, is that when we look at the influence on it, it's something we genuinely do need to consider. I think all I'm doing right now is trying to get hold of as much data, feedback, survey, and to actually be able to make my own decision and look on what we've got in front of us. Because I think that's the position. You can't really commit to something overly now. My processes around AI are there is a takeover in terms of early careers, for example, that's having a real influence on the talent and the process that we're deploying. So for me, no, it's just a case of just keep doing constant continuous improvement and reviewing it as we go, I think.
Yeah. We are slightly over time, or approaching time. So I'm going to take us to one last question, and it's for the both of you. Isn't this all just more work for hiring managers? A train to deploy, hire, train to deploy program, a returner program. Is it not just more work? They're already stretched, they're under the cosh. Do you agree? What would you say to that?
It's definitely the perception. So it's definitely the perception and the barrier that we get from hiring managers. The reality is 96% of those returners are successful, which is a higher number than people who pass probation in STEM. They're good, qualified, experienced people. The reality is most of these returners are going into roles that hiring managers can't fill through standard channels. These are vacancies that have been open. We're not asking them to take somebody lesser. We're asking them to create an equitable opportunity for somebody who might, because of a career break, need a little bit more support, time to get up to speed. But what we're not asking them to do is take somebody who needs, lots of training and development, and they're going to be teaching something that they don't know. So I think it's very much a myth. We can add another myth in, very much a myth, that it's more work for a hiring manager. It's actually solving skills problems, of roles that have remaining unfilled.
Yeah, just probably echo that as well. I think, is it more? No, I think it's actually less. We often hear it, don't have time to handhold, you can't upskill someone into that role, you can't replace experience. I get why managers say it, especially in some of the more elaborate kind of sectors, and it sounds like more work up front. I think in reality, it's less firefighting, fewer repeat hires, less chats with recruitment teams. My favorite ever hiring manager from previous role told me he didn't really like speaking to me because it meant he was doing his job badly, because they weren't growing as an organization, which meant that he was recruiting, and that meant that he was losing people. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. We take care of the heavy lifting, the sourcing, the assessment, the training, so the managers are getting these people on day one that are aligned, they're compliant, they're ready to go, they're not starting from scratch. And I think, you can't replace experience point. I get it. We're not trying to. It's probably the message from my perspective. We're complementing. I think if you had a hiring manager say to me, I need 5 technicians, I wouldn't suggest probably taking all 5 via train to deploy if it was a strong kind of percentage of a team, for example. I would maybe say, why don't we take 1, 2? They will complement your 2 to 3 experience heads. We're creating pipelines that sit alongside experienced teams to supplement, so that knowledge actually can transfer whilst new talent builds capability underneath. It's about kind of future proofing and not replacing. And Natalie said earlier on as well, I think for me, it's the surprise, like take a 1 or 2, see how it goes, try this method, prove that it works. Come and call me and say, actually, that person was great, I will have another 2. That is typically what happens. It sort of acts as a bit of an enabler, a bit of a multiplier. Once people try methods like this, it's very rare they walk away.
Wise words, for sure. We have put together a really handy tool for you guys going through our train to deploy solution. You can use a QR code on your screen to scan it to download your copy. And that's it. That's thank you from all of us. And I appreciate you spending your lunch break with us. And hopefully you've managed to stay warm and dry.
Cool. Thank you, Hazel. Appreciate you facilitating.